Welcome to the 80-20 Baseball Podcast. Strike! The 80-20 Coaching Masterclass. Our weekly get-together where coaches go from new to good and good to great. Mastering the fundamentals and the art of coaching.
Welcome. Awesome to be here with all of you this week. We got Coach Dexter Pendergraft on the podcast today. He's an athletic performance coach specializing in speed development. He's based out of Arkansas. He helps leagues and organizations implement an effective speed training routine, much of this done remotely. He's going to share out some really important tips, some really useful tips to get our players faster. The name of his speed training company is Speed Training Co. It focuses on linear speed, multi-directional agility, and athletic foundations for athletes across various sports, ranging from youth to professional levels. He is well known in the fitness and coaching community for his speed science approach and his work with elite athletes and a lot of youth athletes to improve their explosive power and sprint mechanics. We got part one today of the interview. Dexter is going to share the two best ways he's found to measure the two most important parts of speed for each player. Applicable, usable information that we can use. He also shares out with us the most common mistake he sees with young players when it comes to speed training, when it comes to speed, and two ways to improve it. So we're going to dive in. We got part one of that interview today. Getting our players faster. Great discussion. I really like Coach Pendergraft's mindset. You know, he reached out, wanted to be on the podcast, but to look after all of you listeners and to keep the interview quality high, I'd always have him share with me a detailed explanation of where they're coming from, their coaching principles, philosophy, foundations. And when Dexter got back to me, it was pure alignment in terms of operating systems. And then from there, he's going to cover that speed component app per se. It's a really good conversation, a lot to learn. Now, 530. No, not how many double-doubles I've consumed in my life, which that's probably a decent estimate right there. No, we're not talking double-doubles animal style. We're talking 530 calls in just over 2 weeks at the major league level that were challenged and confirmed to be wrong. Now, here's the kicker. These are just strikes and balls. This doesn't even count the incorrect calls that happen out in the field. 530 calls that were challenged and confirmed to be wrong. The Major League season is only 17 games old. 530 missed, and that's just those that were challenged. I've watched quite a few games where teams don't challenge catchers, hitters, pitchers don't challenge pitches that could have been challenged. 530 incorrect ball strike calls by umpires that, from what I've gathered, are making on average $200 to $250,000 of total compensation a year. And they're working fewer days than the typical person. The Minnesota Twins alone have had 33 calls overturned in their favor. They've had 33 incorrect ball strike calls. They're averaging 2 a game that get overturned in their favor. So when we go out to our next game, take a deep breath and do the math on umpires that are either not getting paid or getting paid minimum wage and doing it as a retirement job, or they're high school kids or what have you. I'm doing the math here. $250K, missing 2 to 3 calls at the plate a game, and you have an umpire that's getting paid minimum wage, and they should be afforded to make 77 bad calls a game. Now, I didn't do the math on that, but my point is, when we go out to the field, set your expectations very low for the umpire. Set them low for the umpires. And you still might not be pleasantly surprised, but at least you're setting your expectations up with and aligning them with reality. All right, just wanted to share that. 530 incorrect calls have already been overturned. It's only April 14th, 530. We're on pace for over 5,000 incorrect ball strike calls at the major league level. So don't be surprised if your little league game has a few or a lot or a ton of incorrect calls. It usually always evens out. And if it is super lopsided, keep an eye out for any $100 handshakes going on. All right, now we know that's not happening, or at least it'd be crazy if it was. My point is here, let's be patient, calm, and set our expectations properly with the umpires. Speaking of umpires, are we having our players shake the umpire's hand after the game and saying thank you? Probably a good idea. It builds a better kind of connection and relationship with the umpire. I believe by doing that and personalizing it a little bit more, kids are more likely to have respect and show respect toward the umpires. All right, let's get our players faster, increase their speed. Let's listen to what Coach Dexter Pendergraft has to tell us, has to share with us. Let's dive in. All right, listeners, I am here with Dexter Pendergraft, Coach Pendergraft. Dexter, how are you doing?
Hey, Bo, thanks for having me. I'm doing wonderful today.
Thanks for coming on and taking the time. And I can't wait to hear what you got to share. You are a speed training coach. I know you do other things, but you're really an expert in the speed training world. First off, before I get into that real quick, I do have to say Dexter is such a cool name because I grew up with Dexter Manley. Remember Dexter Manley played for the Redskins, the Cardinals. He was like, that was the coolest name for me growing up as an NFL player, Dexter Manley.
There's a lot of Dexter cornerbacks.
And I was thinking about that. This is fitting because I looked at the list. Dexter Jackson, NFL safety. Dexter Manley, defensive. He was a defensive end. Dexter Coakley, NFL linebacker. These are all just top-notch athletes. Dexter Fowler, what an athlete he was for the Rockies. And I think he won a World Series with the Cubs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You have a very athletic name, Dexter. You know what? I think of Dexter as fast, and you're talking about speed today. With that said, can you share with the listeners your background, your backstory, and what's led you to where you're at now as a speed training coach?
Yeah, for sure. I love that question because kind of gets everybody started on what the journey was. And that's always a good intro to the listener. So I played baseball, football, track, all growing up in high school. I was always that dude that was the fast guy. If you ask anybody from my hometown, they're going to say, yes, fastest guy I know. That kind of led me to a career in speed by chance, really. I played college baseball at a little JUCO in Missouri called Crowder College. They're doing good things still. Shout out to Coach Lallman over there. When I got done at Crowder, a guy from the area I lived called me up, said, hey, I'm about to start a speed camp. Would you be interested in kind of heading this up with me? I said, sure. We started that first year, I think that was 2007, a speed camp, kind of out of the blue. First time this had been in our area. And really that was when all of that stuff was kind of getting started. The first year, I think we had over 200 kids come to a 4-week speed camp in the summer. And we're not a big area. Our biggest city has about 90,000. So we're not in a huge area, but good size. So anyways, we did that again the next year and had over 200 kids. And we were like, okay, man, we're on to something here. So we took that into a full-time training year round. And from there, we just started partnering with facilities and really kind of honing our craft. Did that for about 15 years. Then I met my wife, a wonderful lady. She found out I owned businesses and ran these training businesses and had no benefits. So I was a kinesiology major and had a master's degree in sports management. And she said, you got a teaching license, you need to get on in there. So I went back to the classroom and taught. I've been teaching elementary physical education, which is very fitting. It's actually helped the speed world that I live in because I'm able to see, a lot of the development side of it from a young age. And I've been able to play, with my program to be able to say, I've got a lot of test subjects. So I've been able to really use them to see how can we develop athletes. And when I think about speed, those guys that are fast, that can jump high, they're athletic. I've kind of over the years figured out it's not just about the speed. It is about the speed, but I got to turn these kids into an athlete. And that's where the progress comes. But yeah, overall, I've been in the speed, strength, and conditioning world for a little over 15 years. I've gone from an in-person program to about the last year we've turned into a fully remote program. I still train my athletes in person in the summers and things like that, but we go. I partner with travel teams at this point and become like their strength and conditioning department. And we're doing that remotely. We use a program platform online. There's videos and the whole thing. I program everything. Have a lot of video calls with the athletes and their parents. It's been a really good program. But that's kind of a little bit about my background in my last 15 or 16 years. So
sounds like you're the person that our listeners that have, that we have board members for league board members. We have travel ball coaches and I guess owners that listen to this. They ought to reach out to you. And as you share more, I think they're going to get more interest in this. And with that said, your background in elementary PE, this is something that didn't dawn on me for years, Dexter. I taught my first PE class, which was an elementary special ed PE class when I was in undergrad at Long Beach State. That was 23 so years ago. And I've taught PE classes since, also obviously coaching for many years too. And I didn't dawn on me until I should say 5 years ago. It hit me that why can I go out and see drills and see practices different than a lot of coaches, even like college coaches and pro coaches. And I go, because I had 5 teams of sometimes 55 kids come through my doors every day. I had 5 different teams. These were not athletic kids. You really had to work hard. I think your elementary background, and my point here to the listeners, you're the second coach I've interviewed in the last month there's a really good hitting coach out of Texas, and he's Hitting Done Right is the brand. And Josh told me that he thinks a big reason why he had a jump start in coaching was he was an elementary PE teacher too. There's something to this that I think really helps us understand and build up the athlete better in a lot of ways, or at least gives us a different insight that can be really advantageous.
Well, and it helps, the organization, the planning, all of that stuff that comes in is huge, because when you're running around with 55 first and second graders, you've got to be very strategic on who you place together, how you place them together, why you place them together, what drills you're doing with them, what activities they're doing, how you're explaining the activities. It's all got to be pretty precise, which bleeds over into the coaching part. That's what a coach does.
We just get so many more reps as a coach being a PE teacher, just so many more reps. So specifically with speed training, I'll tell you what, you can never be too fast. And I guess everybody needs to improve their speed. Everybody that's listening to this, all the coaches, you have kids in your team, every single player can improve their speed. What's the most common sprint form or running form mistake that you see in young kids or youth players? And maybe what's a cue or a drill that you would use to fix that?
This is a good question. I had to really think about this because there's a lot. At the same time, I'm the kind of coach that likes to simplify things. I like to look at the big picture and then how can I simplify? A couple big things. And it's not going to be the answer that you would think. It's not going to be, oh, well, their foot placement is not in the right place, or, something biomechanically. It's not going to be those kinds of answers. Really, it's going to be pretty simple. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to make as simple as possible because that's where we see results. One of the biggest mistakes, and it's not a mistake to the fault of the athlete, but they don't understand what full speed and what acceleration positions are. They don't actually sprint at full speed. And, you see that kid running down the baseline and you're like, well, they don't even look like they're running full speed. Well, they're not, because they've never figured out how to. And going back to your question with the cue, I like cues to be intrinsic. I can give extrinsic cues all day long, and then we're still going to be beating our heads against the wall saying, why is that kid still not running down first baseline at full speed? Well, they still haven't felt it. We have to set up drills to ensure that they can feel the positions we need them to get into. And the easiest way that I've found over the years, and like I said, I've been doing this quite a long time, and I used to beat my head up against the wall, cue. You could come watch me coach an hour-long session right now, and I might say 30 words. I'm going to explain the drills. I'm going to observe, but at the same time, I know my drills are going to give them the feedback they need. And then I'll throw in a couple things. Do you feel that? That step. But we get into that thing over coaching. Timing their sprints. It's literally that simple. We don't do it enough. If you want a kid to be able to run 4 seconds down the baseline, put a clock on them every single time. And they will figure out how to get close to that 4 seconds down the baseline. And some of them, they're not going to. But going from let's say a 4.6 down the baseline to a 4.3 is an improvement. You see what I'm saying? Just because the kid isn't the fastest kid on the team, the fastest kid in the world, does not mean he can't be fast or faster. So number one, I'd say they don't actually sprint full speed. A lot of reasons why. But what I've figured out is if you put a timer on them and you let them work and figure it out, the ones who want to get better will figure it out. And all of those form mistakes that you see will eventually dissolve. It's really crazy. And it's not a instant fix, you know. We're talking months and months of work. But if the kid knows that every time they come to practice, they're going to have a clock on them, they're going to figure out how to beat that time one way or another. And then one of the biggest things I think too is the biggest mistake that we see in youth players is timing. And what I mean by that is coordination. If we're looking at like a 12-year-old kid or a 10 to 14-year-old kid, if we can improve coordination, which in my experience, I've worked with enough athletes, we can improve some coordination every time, no matter how advanced they are. But the coordination gets a little more advanced, obviously. But when we can improve their coordination, they're getting faster. It's a really crazy thing. But that goes back to timing, rhythm. Sprinting is rhythm. So when they have the rhythm to be able to get that foot back over, get that foot down under the hip and push off to the next step, the easier that is for them to do. And the more they don't have to think about it, the more improvements we're going to see. And really not necessarily a cue. And we'll kind of talk about this later. Adding dynamic warm-ups, I call it a warm-up. A warm-up is it's a march, a skip, a run. Those are the three big ones that I use. Plus I'll have what's called a switch. And then I use some straight leg bounds. That's what I call my a warm-up. And those drills, along with, you know, the karaoke, the high knee karaoke, the shuffle, the skips, those things are huge in getting these kids practice with rhythm and coordination. But here's the kicker. It still has to be done and demonstrated and performed correctly. Like, it's not just I'm teaching this kid to skip. I'm expecting perfection. You know, like she's graduated. She's a coach now at a university in volleyball, but one of the best athletes I've ever coached. She was a 36-inch vertical jumper, and she was about 5'8", ran over 20 miles per hour. Every single time she came in, there was something with the coordination drills that I could tweak just to make it a little bit better every time. The rhythm, timing, coordination is huge. That's a mistake that I see because the kids don't have it, and it's a skill. We don't give them enough time to practice that skill.
I received an email from a coach, a listener, you know, is a good coach. I've talked to him, and he said, "Hey coach, I got the coaching plan and the 80-20 baseball coaching plan. Do you really think the warm-up should take 15 to 20 minutes?" I said, "When you put it in, it's probably going to take 20 because they're learning it. But as you get better, it'll probably be 12 to 15 minutes. And he says, "I think he just thought that was too much time to dedicate to that." And I said, "You got to think about it like this. It's not a warm-up. This is an athleticism builder. It's literally, it has every move that you'll make on a baseball field." And I said, "Here's the thing. You're creating better athletes, not just getting them warmed up, because if you can get better athletes, everything else will start working better." And I think about the measure, the timing. I went to a really good sports high school, Southern California. At the time, it was probably one of the top. I think a couple of years before I got to high school, it was the state high school in California, the state high school athletic program of the year. There was a lot of good athletes, and the football team was really good. And you know what they measured, Dexter? They always measured the bench press and the squats and all that. And guess who had the strongest program in Southern California? We did, because we'd look up there and our name would be up on the wall, and we'd move our name. Coach Pendleton would move our name up the wall if we increased our squat, our bench press, our clean, our jerk, our snatch, all that. But you know what they never put on the wall? And you know what they never timed us on? The 40, even a 10-yard, a 40, a 60, 100. They never timed us in sprinting. And I was talking to my brother the other day, and I said, we had some good athletes that were definitely underserved on the speed part. Like our linemen were great, and we could run the ball. But when we went up against the Long Beach schools and some of the more athletic schools, there was a few of us that could hang, and some of us that were actually faster than those guys. But by and large, most of our guys it would have been much better had they just put a stopwatch on us and then put that up on the wall. I know my 40 time would have gone down at least a tenth of a second if I knew my, because everybody in the school would come through and see these numbers too. So you're like, if you were talking to a youth coach and the youth coach, say a youth baseball coach, right? They got a 12-year-old team and they say, hey, Coach Dexter, I got time to do one speed test, right, with my players. What would be a good or a recommended, or maybe a couple that they could choose from speed tests that they could use to gauge that could effectively gauge their players' speed?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two. And there's some guys that I follow that they're doing some crazy stuff with the two that I'm going to give you and the standing broad jump. And they're able to triangulate the numbers that they get from the standing broad jump and these two tests that I'm about to talk about and predict 40 times, predict 60 times. It's crazy stuff. So there's two aspects of speed here. We've got an acceleration phase and we've got a max velocity phase. What that means is the acceleration phase is basically how fast can you get to max speed. Obviously, in every sport and in everything we're doing, even running a 60, we're starting at 0. So we've got to get to the full speed. But then when we get to the full speed, we've got to maintain that. So there's acceleration and there's max velocity. Acceleration, the test that I've been using for years and years and years, is 10-yard dash. If you go to any showcase, any combine, anything, they're going to have a split at that 10-yard dash mark because they want to know, ultimately, those coaches are looking at how fast can they get to full speed. And if you really think about this, there's a few sports, definitely track and field. I can probably think of maybe one or two others that athletes are actually going to reach max velocity or get to max velocity. If they do get to max velocity, other than track and field, they're not going to have to maintain it because they're going to have to stop and switch directions. The acceleration piece is huge. You've got to be able to go from 0 and get to full speed quickly. In that, there's a lot of mistakes that people make. The biggest, easiest thing I can tell you is shin angles are huge. So the shin angle, the lower the angle of the shin during acceleration, the faster they're going to get to full speed. If their shins are more up like this, and you can even tell when a kid's standing on the line, like if they're in like a standing 2-point start and like a wide receiver, you can even tell immediately when you say go, their shin, they may be started up, that wide receiver, their shin will go like this. If they're not one of those accelerators, their shin's going to stay here and you can tell a difference. And that's an easy cue to coach there's several drills that go with that. Second one is a 10-yard fly. And so what a 10-yard fly is, it is the best indicator of max velocity I've ever found. I've been doing this long enough. I've timed plenty of 60s, plenty of 40s. Those have been my two staples for trying to get max velocity, but they don't actually tell me. I'll say it's very skewed depending on the athlete. The 10-yard fly, depending on the age. So if we're talking about that 12-year-old, I'm probably going to set up what's actually called a 20-yard fly. If you look up a 20-yard fly, that means that 10 yards is kind of the build-up zone, and then 10 yards is the fly zone. Kids are working to full speed, and then the clock starts when they cross that line on the first cone, and it stops when they cross the line at the end of the 20 yards. But you're only timing the 10 yards at the end. If I've got an older kid, so 7 years old to 14, 12, I'm running that 20-yard fly. That's a 10-yard build up, 10-yard fly. Once I get over that age, 13 up into high school, I'm going 20 yards. I want them to really build that acceleration in there. The little kids, they just don't have the strength to maintain the acceleration part of it. The older kids getting a little stronger and they're able to produce a little more force for a little bit longer. But the 13 and up, we're going 20 yards to build up, 10 yards in the fly zone. I'll give you some numbers here. I'm looking for a 20 miles per hour. If I can get a kid to 20 miles per hour, we're moving pretty good. All of my fast kids are going to blow that out. They're going to be hitting between 20.7, 20.8, and 22.8 or 21.8. Those lightning fast kids are going to reach that 22 up. And if you look at some of the those Olympic sprinters. It'll show the miles per hour on there. Have you seen what they're running? They're throwing down like 24 and they're on a 100-yard dash and they're hitting 24 at like 60 yards. But anyway, so I can convert the fly, just the 10-yard fly part of it, to a miles per hour. And you can type into Google 10-yard fly, and there's some sites that give like a little calculator for it. But 1.1 10-yard fly is 18.5 miles per hour. When I get to one flat, I'm hitting 20.5 miles per hour. So that's where I'm getting kids faster and without having to say or do anything special. I'm saying, here's a 10-yard buildup and here's a 10-yard fly. We're going to only run about 5 of these because you'll see that the time start to diminish pretty quickly. And the younger ones are a little bit more complicated because they don't understand the max velocity part. So you'll get some jumping up and down. But typically I like to shut it down. If they have 2 sprints that are below their fastest one, usually a third or fourth one's going to be their fastest. If I have 2 below that fastest one, we're shutting it down. It's done. They're not, you know what I mean? At that point, the training is not going to be beneficial for them anymore. I've got a 20 miles per hour club and kids want to get in that 20 miles per hour club. It's really cool seeing these kids push themselves and just blast through that thing. And they figure out, I can't just jog here to get to the fly zone. I got to go from the get-go, or I'm not going to be able to hit at full speed, because you need to be hitting that first part of the fly zone at full speed. I think about these lights that like flash through. That's what I want to see, is they're going and then boom, they're through it and it's done. But those are really 2 really, really good predictors of how fast a kid can run and if they're improving.
What do you think is going on with kids that they don't know the feel of full speed? Because let's say they've been driving this Porsche for 15 years and you get in the car and your buddy's got the Porsche. He picks you up. It's a manual, right? It's a stick shift. And you're looking at it, you go, he never takes it out of third gear. What's going on? And you go, you're not like fourth and fifth. He goes, oh, I didn't even know that had that. This is, now that you bring it up, this is something very common. And you're right, because there's so many kids I've coached over the year. Now I think about it, that you're like, hey, you're not running full speed. And then they just, once you bring it to their attention, then
they still don't know how.
They still don't know how, but at least they know there's another gear. Why does that happen?
That's been I've made a career on that very thing right there. And, when parents don't see results, they're not going to send their kids to me anymore. That's a question I've struggled with for over 15 years. And I think the first part of your question was kind of talking about why is that happening? I think a lot of it is, number one, is reps. They don't have enough reps. And I'm not saying like we're going to go run 20 10-yard dashes. I'm saying consistent reps with a timer on them. They haven't had enough reps running full speed, number one. But also, all that research that is out about play and kids play and all of that, I don't know what it looked like 30 years ago. So I can't compare to the kid running down first baseline. And he's got third and fourth gear, but did he use it? I don't know that. But I know what we've got now, and I know the research of the play. Kids don't go play anymore. It's very structured, skill-based, or they're sitting on the couch playing video games. You know what I mean? So it's like the 2 extremes. So then, again, it goes back into the reps. If I'm out there playing tag, this is so dumb, but I was in 4th or 5th grade, and then we had this game, and I don't even know why we played this game, how it came up. But a group of us would stand around this one kid, and like I would be in the middle sometimes. And if you were in the middle, you were on the ground, like taking a knee. And then some other people would be in the middle sometimes. But basically, you had to sit in the middle, and then you had to look. And you could either like smack somebody and move them out of the way and take off running, or you could just see a hole in the circle and take off. And as soon as you took off, they're all chasing you. I'll never forget. I was never more terrified, because what they were going to do next was tackle me. So what I had to figure out was, I don't want to be tackled. I got to run. And I don't think kids are doing that. You know what I mean?
All right, that wraps up part 1 of our interview. Part 2 coming next week. He brings it again next week with some really good information about getting our players faster. Super important stuff. Can't wait to see you all back here next week. A great way that doesn't cost you anything but just a few minutes to support this podcast. It would be greatly appreciated is to leave a kind, positive review. That would be really helpful. And a lot of other great stuff over at 8020baseball.com. Can't wait to have you all back next week. Until then, let's keep taking care of our health so we can be at our best for our families, our close friends, our players. Let's take this info out there. Let's put it into action. Y'all take care. Until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. We got this. Now, let's take the field.